The game was, by any measure, a physical one. From the opening tip-off, both teams established that this would not be a night for easy baskets or comfortable possessions. Bodies were contesting every rebound, defenders were pressing full court, and the referee's whistle was working overtime. Physical basketball is part of the sport at this level, but there is a difference between competitive physicality and a game that crosses into borderline chaos. And by the end of the fourth quarter, the line between the two had grown difficult to identify. What made the night remarkable, however, was not the basketball itself. It was what happened in the 15 minutes after the final buzzer. Before that story can be told properly, it requires some context about the conditions that produced it. From the opening possession, the defensive game plan against the team's young star was transparent. Isolate her at the top of the key, run action after action through her on the defensive end, and depend on the accumulated fatigue of 94 feet of full-court pressure to diminish her effectiveness as the game progressed. It is a tactic that has been used against young players throughout basketball history, and it works often enough that coaching staffs continue to deploy it. The logic is straightforward. A rookie in her first full professional season has not yet learned to conserve energy across 40 minutes of this level of physicality, and an opponent that forces her to work defensively on every trip down the floor is an opponent that is investing in the fourth quarter. The first half unfolded more or less according to that script. The offense struggled to find rhythm. Shots that have been falling consistently throughout the season were catching iron, sliding off the back of the rim, or not finding the target at all. At the break, the team trailed by 7, and the shooting percentage told an uncomfortable story. It was the kind of half that could break a young player's confidence or break open whatever is underneath the surface. The second half revealed which of those possibilities applied here. The team came out of the locker room with a clear tactical adjustment. If the shots were not falling, the answer was to make the opponent pay on the other end. What followed over the next 2 quarters was a defensive performance that deserved more attention than it ultimately received, given everything else that would happen that night. The perimeter was locked. The opposition was funneled into contested mid-range attempts and long 2-point shots, exactly the kinds of possessions a defense designs for. In the fourth quarter alone, the opposing offense converted just 4 of 17 field goal attempts. That is a 23.5% conversion rate in the decisive period of a professional basketball game, achieved through discipline and coordination rather than luck. The team that had trailed by 7 at halftime found a way to win without ever solving its own offensive problems, and that is in many respects a more difficult task. The final buzzer sounded, the victory was secured, and then the real story of the evening began. During the second quarter, near the halftime horn, a contested rebound under the basket escalated into a heated exchange between players from both teams. The officials intervened, the situation was brought under control, and the referees assessed double technical fouls, one to a player from each side. Standard procedure in professional basketball requires that players and coaching staff be notified when a technical foul is assessed. The notification is not a courtesy. It carries direct competitive implications. A player who accumulates 2 technical fouls in a game is automatically ejected. Awareness of that foul status is essential information. In this instance, that notification did not reach the star player. The sequence of events remains unclear, whether the miscommunication originated with the officiating crew, with the bench, or somewhere in the transition to the locker room at halftime. But the result was unambiguous. She played the entire second half, carrying a technical foul she did not know existed, 1 infraction away from automatic ejection at any moment. She played through contact, engaged with opponents, and competed in the kind of game where incidental accumulation of fouls is a near certainty, completely unaware of her situation. She learned about the technical foul from a reporter. The moment was captured in the post-game press conference and spread quickly. The expression on her face when the information was delivered shifted from the composed posture of an athlete finishing a media obligation to something more unguarded. A flash of genuine surprise followed almost immediately by something harder to categorize. Amusement, frustration, and exasperation arrived at roughly the same time. She spoke carefully, but not cautiously. The technical, she said, made perfect sense for the officials working that night. She said it with a tone that made clear she was not issuing a compliment. She acknowledged, with a degree of wry self-awareness, that if she had known she was sitting on a technical foul for the entire second half, she might have conducted herself with a bit more restraint during a game that was inviting physical confrontations at regular intervals. She thanked the reporter for informing her about her own foul status since, as she noted, the people officially responsible for that communication had not managed to do it. She was aware, she said, that the comments would carry a financial cost, The league office monitors post-game press conferences closely, and public criticism of officiating is among the more reliably penalized offenses in professional basketball. A fine, she acknowledged, was likely already being processed. She was not particularly deterred by that prospect. That last detail prompted some reaction from those who felt the criticism, while understandable, put her in a difficult position with the league. But the more substantive issue ran deeper than the fine. The technical foul communication breakdown was not a minor administrative error. In a game where her team was navigating a second half without a reliable offensive engine, where the margin between winning and losing was thin, having a star player one contested play away from ejection, without anyone on the bench tracking that reality, represented a meaningful competitive disadvantage. It did not cost them the game, but it could have. Viewers who watched the broadcast and supporters who followed the game closely were not quiet about the officiating in general terms. The calls throughout the night had drawn criticism well before the post-game revelation. The sense expressed by those watching was that the officiating added instability to an already physical game, and that the standard being applied was inconsistent from one possession to the next. The technical foul miscommunication became a focal point in that broader conversation, but it was not an isolated grievance. It landed on top of a night that had already accumulated plenty of frustration. The head coach addressed the same topic from a different angle. She told reporters that no one on the coaching staff had been informed of the technical foul. The bench had operated throughout the second half without knowledge that its most important player was one call away from leaving the game. She did not elaborate extensively on the mechanics of how that failure occurred. What she did address, with more enthusiasm, was the question of how to manage a player whose competitive instincts push against the boundaries of what officials are likely to permit. Her answer was not hedged. The passion that makes this player difficult to officiate is the same quality that makes her extraordinary. A coach who tries to manufacture restraint in a player built the way she is built risks removing the thing that makes the investment worthwhile. The goal is not to produce compliance. The goal is to channel intensity in the direction that produces winning basketball, and that distinction matters at this level of competition. It was a reasonable answer, and it reflected a coaching philosophy that has a legitimate track record. It also, not incidentally, shifted the framing of the conversation away from the question of whether this particular young player was going to attract suspensions or fines that could affect roster availability later in the season. There was, separately, a question about Grace, a reserve player who was sent into the game and, according to some who watched, appeared to be operating without full knowledge of the plays being run in that rotation. The details were not fully elaborated upon in post-game comments, but the implication was that a player entered a competitive professional environment underprepared by the staff, responsible for her readiness. If accurate, that represents a coaching and preparation failure distinct from the officiating issues, one that belongs to a different conversation but is worth noting because it speaks to organizational depth and the standards applied to players coming off the bench. At a certain level of professional competition, every player in a rotation needs to be ready. Sending a player into the game without adequate preparation is not fair to the player, and it is not fair to the team. In a game as tight and physically demanding as this one was, the margins are too thin for that kind of lapse. Beyond the post-game noise, two performances from the game itself deserve attention. The reserve guard came off the bench and immediately disrupted the opposing offense with full court pressure that changed the possession dynamics in the third quarter. She then finished a drive to the basket by hitting a three-pointer that, in the context of the game's flow, was the kind of play that closes out the possibility of an opposing run before it starts. It was the work of a player who understands her role and executes it precisely when the situation calls for it. The exact contribution a contending team needs from its bench. The front court anchor was, in statistical terms, dominant on the glass. 16 rebounds in a game of this nature, against a team that competes physically for position, is not a passive accumulation. It reflects a player who won individual battles consistently across 4 quarters, who understood that her team's offensive inefficiency made second-chance opportunities valuable, and who delivered them. 16 boards is a number that changes games. In this one, it contributed to a victory that the offensive output alone could not have produced. That is worth saying plainly, because the post-game conversation consumed nearly all of the available attention. The officiating, the technical foul revelation, the press conference comments, these are the parts of the evening that moved quickly through social media and into broader discussion. They are legitimately interesting, and the question of communication standards in professional officiating is one the league office will eventually need to address in more than financial terms. But the basketball underneath all of it told a story about a team that found a way to win when the most predictable avenue to victory was closed. Down 7 at halftime with the offense misfiring, the team did not panic and did not abandon its defensive structure. It made the adjustments that professional teams are supposed to make, executed them well enough to hold an opposing offense to under 24% shooting in the fourth quarter, and emerged with a result that will matter when the standings are evaluated later in the season. Whether the fine comes, and it almost certainly will not change what happened on the court. Whether the league acknowledges that a breakdown in officiating communication put a player and her team in a position they should not have been in, that conversation is worth having regardless of how it is eventually resolved. The team has a rematch scheduled against this same opponent in 6 days. The physical edge from this game has not dissipated. The bad blood introduced in that halftime exchange, the technical fouls, the competitive frustration on both sides, none of that evaporates between now and the next tip-off. If anything, it intensifies. The rookie will be ready. Whether the officials and the communication structures around them will be similarly prepared is a different question, and one that a number of people watching this game are now asking with rather more urgency than they were before the final buzzer.